So the existence of neutral mutations, the idea that some changes in the genetic material do not cause a fitness difference, means that there must be stochastic effects also in the change of allele frequencies. There must be stochastic effects in evolutionary processes also. These are all covered by the name genetic drift. So let me try to illustrate such a stochastic process. Imagine that we have a population of 5 organisms on this very simple slide here, where we have 2 different alleles indicated by the orange and green colors. Let's imagine that each individual, these are reproducing asexually, and that each individual leaves 2 offspring. All of these 2 alleles we assume will have the same absolute fitness. This should mean that, on average, we would expect every single individual to leave the same number of offspring in the next generation. So, of the 2 offspring, one of them will die, and generation number 2 would look exactly like generation number 1 in terms of allele frequencies. However, things are of course not that simple. There are many stochastic effects having nothing to do with how fit an animal is that can cause it to die or to not reproduce. There can be tornadoes, it can be hit by a falling tree. There are many different reasons, stochastic reasons, why some perfectly fit animals would die and other equally fit animals would survive. So let's imagine that something like this happens, that instead of having one of each of these alleles die, we now instead have 2 of one of the orange alleles die and 2 of the green ones survive to the next generation. This would mean that in generation 2 there would now be 1 more green allele and 1 less orange. If this sort of phenomenon continues for a number of generations, that there's an unequal and stochastic death of alleles like this, then if we keep it up for sufficiently long, at some point only one of the alleles will be left. We say it's become fixed. This means that even for completely equally fit alleles, even if we have completely neutral mutations, we will eventually, if we wait long enough, end up with one of them being lost. So the effect of genetic drift is to decrease genetic variation. This I've shown a simulation of that here, where I've simulated population growth for a population size of 20 individuals having 2 different alleles. One of the alleles starts out in all of these simulations with a frequency of 40%. Then I let them run randomly removing, each individual has 200 offspring, and then I randomly remove or select 20 individuals for each new generation. And this means that the different alleles will fluctuate up and down randomly. What you can see from the simulation is that these populations of, in this case, one of the alleles, will fluctuate up and down randomly until at some point it will run into one of the edges of the plot. Either that allele will be fixed, it'll be the only allele left, or it will go extinct, it will disappear, and the other allele will be the only one left. This sort of effect then is, as I say, that the effect here is that genetic drift causes a decrease in genetic diversity. The effect is, and this is probably obvious, more strongly felt in small populations. Here's the effect in a population size of 20, and you can see that one of the alleles, all of the alleles in these 10 simulations, in all these 10 simulations, one of the alleles have become fixed, one of them has disappeared within 45 generations. Here's the same simulation run in a larger population, 200 individuals. You can see that again there's tremendous fluctuation of the allele frequencies, but now it's much harder, because you have a larger population, for an allele to completely disappear or to become completely fixed. If we wait long enough, then one of them will become fixed. And this plot, they start becoming fixed maybe after a few hundred generations instead. So the effect of genetic drift is much more strongly felt in small populations. As I say, genetic drift causes genetic variation to decrease, but some of that variation is recreated by mutation. So I've tried to illustrate that in this plot, where we see the fate of different alleles in a genome over time. So at time point 0, we have 2 different alleles, A1 and A2. Their frequencies fluctuate randomly. At some point, allele 1 disappears. at some other point here, a new allele A3 arises by mutation. It goes up and then disappears again. A new allele A4 arises and goes up. Allele A2 goes down, and this will continue indefinitely. So different alleles will be present at different times. Some alleles will disappear as a result of genetic drift, but other alleles will then appear as a result of mutation, and all in all, the level of genetic diversity will be an equilibrium that's decided by the balance between mutation and selection, mutation and drift here. In addition to this sort of stochastic effect, there are also other stochastic effects that can cause changes in populations, cause changes in allele frequencies in populations. One of them is the bottleneck effect, and I've tried to illustrate that on this slide. So imagine you have a population of organisms with a number of different alleles present, illustrated on this slide with the different colors. If there is suddenly a sharp decrease in population size, for instance, as the result of a natural disaster, maybe a volcano or a tornado or a meteorite or some such thing, so only a few individuals survive, then those surviving individuals, their alleles, the genotypes that they have, will not necessarily be in the same proportions as the genotypes in the original population. In this case, only the blue allele survived, for instance. So the new population will have a much different composition of genotypes than the original population. This is another way in which stochastic effects can change the genetic makeup of a population, and that can, of course, influence the evolution of the population. Examples from real life of bottleneck effects is, for instance, the cheetah. If you look at the genomes of different cheetahs, it turns out there's almost zero genetic difference between them. This, it's been inferred, must be caused by a bottleneck effect, a bottleneck event in the cheetah population about 10,000 years ago that caused there to be only very few surviving individuals, and all the present-day individuals have derived from those few survivors. This is a real problem for cheetahs because it means they have, if there's some disease that hits the current genotype, then there's very little diversity to select from, and it might wipe out the entire population of cheetahs. So it's something to worry about if you're into preserving populations like this. Another similar example, the northern elephant seal. This was hunted for many years for food by whalers and other seamen. This caused there to be about only 20 surviving individuals in 1896, it was estimated. We now have a population of about 30,000 individuals, but there's again almost no genetic diversity between these individuals. So if this population survives for sufficiently long, they may pick up new variation as a result of mutation, but right now there's not much for natural selection to work on in this population. A similar effect to the bottleneck effect is the so-called founder effect. It's again the same. You have a population with a number of different alleles. Then a few of these individuals leave the original population to found a new population. For instance, a few birds moving to a deserted island, or a few fish making it into a new lake, or some phenomenon like that. And again, since it's a random sample from the original population, the alleles and the allele frequencies in this new population will be different than what it was in the original population, and exactly like the bottleneck effect, we now have a new genetic makeup, a new evolutionary path. One real-life example of the founder effect is this lionfish. This is usually a fish that lives in the Pacific, but there's a new population in the Atlantic that's apparently caused by maybe people having them in aquariums and then getting rid of them when they become too big or they are tired of them. And it appears that the Atlantic population may have been seeded by as few as 10 individuals. So again, there's quite low genetic diversity in the Atlantic population of lionfish.